Welcome to Urban Reach, New York City. Super excited to be launching this amazing ministry and nonprofit here in New York City, based in Brooklyn at the Church of God of East Flatbush. And just excited to tell you guys what to expect from us in the near future as well as the years to come. So for this first content and this first video, I wanted to introduce the leader of Urban Reach New York City and the visionary behind this, Bishop R.C. Hugh Nelson. Bishop, will you kind of give us like a 2-minute introduction of who you are, who you pastor, and kind of why urban ministry is important?
Fantastic. Thank you, Kyle. This is surely a pleasure. I'm Bishop R.C. Hugh Nelson. My wife, Dinah Nelson, and I, we have been pastoring the Church of God of East Flatbush, located in Brooklyn, New York, now for the past 17 years. We both were born in Jamaica, spent years in England. I studied out in Germany. We spent time in Cleveland, Tennessee, while I attended the Church of God Theological Seminary. Afterwards, we pastored in Ottawa, Canada, for 8.5 years, and 17 years ago, we accepted the opportunity to become pastors of the Church of God of East Flatbush. And so I have served, whether in London, England, in Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada, and of course, here in Brooklyn, New York. And so one of the things I discovered is that in many major cities or urban spaces, there tends to be pockets of ministry. And so you could find your pocket and stay within that enclave. So, for example, the Church of God of East Flatbush was started 50 years ago by Jamaican immigrants, and to a great extent has remained a Jamaican first generation congregation. So when we came 17 years ago, there was only one non-Jamaican who was in the leadership. And so when we started looking even deeper, we discovered that almost the entire leadership was first generation Jamaican immigrant, which meant that even their children who were born here, who are now more Americanized than Jamaican, while they loved their church and became engaged in their church, to a great extent, they were living in two worlds. And so we had to make a deliberate, intentional shift in terms of incorporating a broader spectrum. So that meant giving even those who are born here, American born, an opportunity, not just to come to church, but to find their giftings and also place in leadership, and also to incorporate other cultures or nationalities. So we have been working at that, and we're grateful for the journey. Today, we have over 24 different nationalities. And although the congregation is still to a great extent visible minority, it is much more inclusive. And so we've always prayed that God would give us the grace that we move not only across national boundaries, but also across racial boundaries, and to somehow be a presence, a witness in the New York City landscape of what the church was meant to be. People redeemed by the blood of Jesus who are able to embrace and love each other.
That's awesome. That's very good stuff. And one of the things that I loved about you and the first time meeting you was your vision for, though you've always kind of been a Caribbean or island church, that your vision for reaching a diverse community of people, not only in Brooklyn, for New York City. And just so people know, for me, my name is Kyle Peacock. I'm originally from Tennessee and came, if you can't tell by my accent, came to New York City on a mission trip when I was 15, totally rocked my world, changed my perspective and changed my views on how to be a Christian and walk out the gospel. And I am, for any shape or form, you can say I am addicted to New York City. I love it. Back in Tennessee, it was 100,000 people that look like me, sound like me, talk like me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I live in Astoria, Queens, which is some experts say is the most diverse neighborhood in the entire world. It is 180,000 people speaking 163 different languages in my neighborhood, and none of them speak English as the first language. Like, I am the minority in my neighborhood, and I love it. So one thing that has just really been my ministry calling has been to helping people figure out what they want to do for as Christians and as ministry. So partnering with Bishop Hugh Nelson and forming Urban Reach NYC has literally just been a God moment for me. It really feels like God has been training me up this entire lifetime for this, and I am just so excited about this because New York City is near and dear to my heart. There's some experts say there's between 10 and 14 million people that live here once you count up all the undocumented and illegal people living here.
Yes.
So there's somewhere between 10 and 14 million people living here, and we speak over 800 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love the culture. I love the diversity, and I believe that the gospel-centered church and the Christ-centered church should reflect that diversity and should reflect the not multicultural, but almost transcultural, where we just love God, but still stay like our same unique selves. And I just love that about you and your church and the vision we have. So now that you guys know about us, we would love to share what Urban Reach NYC is and
even before you move to the next level, Kyle, because one of the beauties of doing ministry in the urban landscape is that God gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the love of Christ.
Right.
And as I say to even our non-Jamaican members who join the church, and we have a number of Black Americans, I says, when you join this church, don't lose your culture.
Right.
Don't lose your distinction. That's what brings the giftings to the table. Be you. Be uniquely you. But know that we're here to embrace you just where you are.
Yeah. And I mean, that's always been a thing for me too. And like, I love the church that I grew up in. I love being a Southern white guy from Tennessee, but I also love being a part of a global kingdom that had, like, I am a Southern white guy, but I don't want to go to a Southern white church. I don't think that a church in New York City should represent, like, it shouldn't be a Southern white church in New York City. It should represent wherever they're put. Your church should reflect the community that you're a part of and the community that you sit in. So that's a big thing for me, is I want to sit down with pastors and ministers and say, all right, you want to get involved in outreach, you want to reach your community. Well, let's look at the demographics of your community. Who is your community? Who's in your community? What language do they speak? What do they do? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? And through that lens of figuring out that demographic of your community, now we then know the best way to reach them with the gospel.
And being the presence of Christ.
Right.
So it's again, if you're in a neighborhood where the people around you reflect a dominant ethnicity, it doesn't mean you have to be ashamed or embarrassed that you're only reaching that demographic. The most important thing is that the ministry is open. One of the challenges that we had to deal with is, where do we draw the line between culture and scripture? And we respect culture, and we know that culture has a place. But at the end of the day, the gospel, the gospel is the gospel because it is able to cross borders. So that means when the gospel is preached, if you have to embrace my culture to be accepted, that's not the gospel. That's cultural identity. The beauty of the gospel is that once it is preached, it can reach across borders, regardless of race, ethnicity, and we can learn to love and embrace each other as a diverse body. That's who Christ has called us to be.
Man, that is awesome. That you so well put, and totally agree with everything you said. And that's just one thing that, again, just that's why I love being in New York City, is that literally, like, in my neighborhood, I can walk 5 blocks and be in a different country, and then walk
Exactly.
another 5 blocks and
That's
be in a
it.
different
That's it.
country. And
That's
I
it.
love that.
That's it.
Um, so I want to not hinder anybody by going to their church and saying, like, hey, your church should be what my church was back in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is not a successful ministry style or format for me to set up a Southern white church in
That's it.
the Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens. Like, I need to want to help a church become the best Brooklyn church that they
That's
could
right.
be,
That's right.
So that's kind of my heart and vision. So with it,
And we resonate. And one of the beauties why it was so easy even to make this connection, because for years we had been praying. One of the things that I am very intentional about, and I say to the congregation, is that my prayer is that whoever God brings through the door, regardless of their race or nationality, if God brings them here, we learn to love them just the way they are. We don't want them to change before we can love them. They don't have to love West Indian food. They don't have to identify with the West Indian culture. But if God brings them in the family, then we are prepared to accept them and love them where they are. And so we've always been praying about having this kind of partnership. So when, of course, I was introduced and heard about you, Kyle, and your background, and of course, we met in Manhattan and talked about it, it was a dream come true. It's more because the goal is not to have a token representative. The goal is to, because in truth, when we come to the table, everything shifts.
right.
And being willing to allow the Holy Spirit to reshape us, because many times we're so bent on shaping the other without being willing to be reshaped ourselves.
Exactly.
And so you've come into New York, buried yourself in New York. I'm amazed at some of the connections that you have made. But that again is, I believe, the work of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Is that He brings us to cross paths at the right time, and where we're willing not only to change, but to allow ourselves to be changed for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah, and that's not to get too much into current events and drag us down into that, but I would just say that you see that a lot in the world today, whether it be the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, or the social injustice and the social unrest. I think the problem that not only the non-Christians have, but within the Christian community, is that we are all have on one goggles of one perspective.
That's it. That's
And
it.
it's like we're sitting at a table discussing our perspective and our ideals and what should happen and all the answers, but it's all with the same perspective. Like,
That's it.
everybody at the table has the same perspective as me. So
That's
I
it.
think as a global kingdom and as a global church, we should have as many perspectives and as many representatives sitting at that table. So we can say, okay, let's have as many perspectives as we can get so we can move forward together.
Perfect. And so if we're talking to others who have the same worldview, then all we're having is an echo.
Right.
And so that's what many times what makes the church non-effective in really impacting our society, because we're in a silo talking to ourselves.
Right.
But once we step out of that silo and begin to engage with others, we discover our own blind spots, our own implicit biases, our own proclivities to judge people wrongly. And it's in that space of interaction that we all grow.
Yeah. So I mean, that was one of the things that really just stuck with me. Like, I remember when Bishop Steve Smith told me about you and you wanted to meet me, and we sat down at that little diner across from
That's
Grand
right.
Central Station in Manhattan. It was like God literally had a God moment on me, because like everything you were saying was everything was in my mind. Mm-hmm. So it was like we were just started clicking, and I was just like, man, I'm so excited about.
We are excited having you on board, man. We are blessed.
Right.
And it's the amazing thing. And I know in a few minutes you're going to talk about what we offer in
Right.
terms of our plan to offer in terms of urban reach. But even you coming on board as a member of staff, as we build this hybrid together,
Right.
already your presence, your perspective has impacted this congregation on several levels.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because here's no, and I want you to know that, because here's what happens. And this is why it is so important that there's room at the table
Right.
for a diversity of views. So sometimes we grapple with the same issue, and because we're looking at it through the same lens.
Right.
And I invite pastors, if all the people at your table see the worldview from the same perspective, or see ministry through the same lens, you have to creatively create space so that you can broaden that perspective, because that's how we become extremely much more effective for the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, we're saying that again and again, just saying that I think our strength as a Christian community is our diversity.
That's it.
And
That's it.
and sometimes we don't realize that we stick with who sounds like us, talks like us, and looks
Yeah,
like us, and we're actually handicapping ourselves to
that's
a
it.
greater
That's it.
calling. And we can go further together than we can by ourselves. And when I say by ourselves, it's just meaning one perspective. So it's always been my heart to gain as many perspectives as I can, because like I've always been a city person. Even when I was growing up in the mountains of East Tennessee, like I wanted to be in the city. Like I love, like, and people in New York like make fun of me now. I love the subways. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love like getting
yeah.
crammed in the subway and bumping in the shoulders, and I just love it. I mean, I love, like, there's a person speaking Italian, and there's
Mhm.
a person speaking like Spanish and whatever. There's like 7 different languages around me today coming over here, and I loved it. And I think that our church should reflect that, and that's one thing I'm excited to help churches in New York City do, is saying like, hey, we're not saying what you're doing is wrong at
That's
all. What you're doing is amazing, and you should be honored for it. And we love that you actually accepted the call to either lead a church or be a part of a church in New York City and help reach New Yorkers for Christ, because that is my heart. I want to come in and say, how can we improve that? How can we get the most out of that? Let's squeeze all that. But there's a lot of potential in our congregations. There's a lot of potential in New York City. We just might not be squeezing the potential out enough. And I just want to squeeze that potential out and turn it from potential into producing something amazing.
That's right.
So with that said, is we want to explain to you what Urban Reach New York City is. So I will kick this off and pass it over to Bishop to fill in some points. But we want to come together as a local church, Church of God of East Flatbush, and me coordinating a nonprofit ministry called Urban Reach New York City to help local churches in New York City improve, either start an outreach program or improve their outreach program. So if you're a pastor watching this right now and you need help starting or improving, this is for you. And I want to come into your congregation and to meet you first and see what is your heart, what is your passion, what is your vision for outreach, and what are the giftings and skill set within your congregation that are already there, and then what are the demographics of your community. Because I truly believe that God has placed the individuals in your congregation that have the giftings and have the skill set to do amazing outreach and a variety of different outreaches. So we're doing this model of discover, disciple, deploy. And discover, disciple, deploy literally means we want to help you discover your outreach calling. We want to help you to be discipled in that outreach calling. And then we want to help you be deployed in that outreach calling. So we're starting off simple right now. We have amazing 3-year plans, 5-year plans. But for the next 3 to 6 months in the next year, we're going to start with training on urban, like we're going to do an urban ministry podcast. We're going to be doing interviews like this. We're going to be just coming up with as much online training content as we possibly can. And then we will, when the government opens up and, you know, we get back to in-person stuff and the pandemic ends, we will be more than happy to start in-person trainings and seminars and discipleship programs and outreach events. And I mean, I'm just super excited about the stuff that I want to tell you about, the stuff that we're not ready for yet, but I'm so excited about it. So Bishop,
and so ultimately, obviously, to get this off the ground, it had to have the partnership with the local church. So the local church doesn't own it. The local church is only given a platform for the launch of Urban Reach.
Right.
But ultimately, what we're hoping for is a network of ministries that can cross-pollinate with ideas, can share space. And one of the things that, Kyle, you've also done very well, as I've said, look, ask me any question.
Right.
And there's not anything that just hits you, ask me, why do you do it this way? Why do you do it this way? And it's amazing, pastors, that we don't have someone from the outside who looks at our ministry through different lens and just asks us the why. Why do you do things the way? Many of us, even though we're doing ministry in the urban setting, we're literally raised in rural settings. So, and we bring that context to the urban landscape, which is extremely contradictory, because in the urban setting, you do ministry completely different. And so just having Kyle as my unofficial
consultant.
Well, I mean, I just explore, just ask me, why do we do things this way? Is it the way that you've always done it in Jamaica? Or is this the way you think works best in Brooklyn? And you can only learn when you're humble enough to be corrected. And having someone to just test or check the accountability of the structure is important, because if you cannot get honest feedback, you will create a space that is literally non-effective, make you comfortable, but destroy your potential.
Yeah, and I think that is so important for, you know, not only just congregations within New York City to understand, but people outside of New York City coming into New York City to do ministry, is New York City is not a city, it's a world. And and the way we do things, and I say we as a New Yorker, is totally different from the way I did things in Tennessee, or you would do things in Jamaica or anything else. So I do have my Southern white Tennessee goggles on sometimes, and you might have your Jamaican goggles on sometimes. And we say, am I pushing this form of ministry? Am I pushing this outreach as a Southern white Tennessee guy, or am I forcing this ministry because I think it's actually good for this diverse community of New York City? So I think that's always good to have accountability and have a check and say, like, look, there might be you know, you're trying to reach millennials, you're trying to reach the Jewish people in your community, you might be trying to reach the Pakistani community or the Muslim community. And it's like, well, there might be something that you're doing in your church is repelling them, not attracting them.
That's right. That's right.
So that's one thing that, you know, I think is very important for churches to understand and for Christians to understand, is like, your ways might not be the best ways for right now. Like it might have worked 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's not working in 2020. And we've learned that with the pandemic, you know.
Oh my goodness. And in many ways, COVID-19 has been a blessing.
Yeah.
Because it has literally challenged the status quo. And the ministry which is not able to make the transition will not be in existence in the future.
Right. Yeah. So that's the one thing we are talking to pastors right now, saying, if you're in the Bronx, if you're in Brooklyn, if you're in Queens, if you're in Manhattan, or even Staten Island, you know, that we want to help you. We are here to you. Like Bishop's vision was literally to bring me on staff to help you. So it is literally my job description to go out and find churches and find congregations to help, and say, like, hey, how can I'm here? Like I literally, you know, not to get back on my story, but people were asking me when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, they're like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I was like, I want to live in New York City. I want to help local churches. Like, I've been saying that for years, and it's finally, God has given me an opportunity through Urban Reach NYC to walk out that vision and that mission that I've had in my soul for like 15 years now. So with that saying, we're talking to pastors and churches saying we want to help you discover, disciple, and deploy your outreach calling. But we're also talking to people outside of New York City. We're part of helping New York City is I want to recruit you to come move to New York City and do ministry. So we want to discover, disciple, and deploy you in urban ministry in New York City too. So if you're watching this and you're in Tennessee, you're in California, you're in Arizona, contact me and I will set up a short-term mission trip when COVID-19 ends. We want to do a short-term discovery mission trip where we're going to take a week of your time and we're going to expose you to different forms of ministry. Because when I got saved, and this is a thing that we can talk about too, is I thought being a part of ministry was I had to be a senior pastor, a youth pastor, or a praise and worship leader. No one really told me that, like, hey, you can do hundreds of different types of ministry and not have to be on the ministry team during Sunday morning service. So that's one thing. We want to show you what it means to serve in a soup kitchen or a food pantry or clothing closet, or go to a city shelter and do a kids service in a family shelter, or go to a homeless, or go to a Union Square Park or Washington Square Park and give a homeless person a blanket and a toiletry pack. And we want to expose you to different forms of ministry. That way you can find one that you're very passionate about, because I believe that when God created you, he put giftings and skill sets inside of you. And sometimes we just have to mine that out and like polish it up a little bit. But once you find your gifting and your skill set, and then like, man, I did 7 different types of ministries on this mission trip. I didn't like 5 of them, but this one I loved. And I'm going to go back home and I'm going to do that in my hometown of Tennessee or Georgia, Alabama. I'm going to go to Lee University, or I'm going to go to a college, and that's where I'm going to go in my career path. I'm going to go in that. And then I want to get plugged back into a New York City church. So if you're seeing this and you're outside of New York City, this is for you too. Is saying, if you want to get involved in urban ministry, especially in New York City, reach out to us and we are going to get you plugged in to because there might be a local church in Brooklyn or the Bronx that is looking for you. They just don't know that you're out there. So,
and what better way to be exposed to cross-cultural ministry?
Right.
So you could send you instead of flying to Singapore or Japan or China or the Caribbean, you can get all of those experiences right here in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, that was like I was doing a mission trip last year for a group out of Alabama, Church of the Highlands, and that was one of what they said. Like, there's a guy literally counting all the different cultural experiences. He's like, man, I've been in New York City for 3 days, and I've had food from 7 different countries. I've went and ministered to people from 9 different countries, and just a 72-hour trip, we exposed them to 9 different cultures, and that they didn't have to go on a $1,500 plane ticket to somewhere. I literally can take you to China in Queens. I can take you to Egypt in Queens.
That's right.
I can take you to Jamaica in Brooklyn.
That's right.
Like, I can take you to anywhere you want to go in the world. I can take you there in New York City. Right. So
not just exposed to the food, but the culture,
right, and
the church that's in that cultural context.
Yeah, and that is the main thing too. Is like, I was talking to one of my ministry partners here, and that runs international students, and that's what they do. They say there's people from all over the country or all over the world come to New York City for schooling, and they come here. There's all these students around the world. They want to go to university in New York City. Yeah. So what their ministry does is they reach international students who come from non-Christian countries. They get them saved and get them edified with the gospel here, and then they go back and be missionaries in their own countries. So you can literally reach the entire world, literally inside of New York City and outside of New York City, by never leaving New York City. So I mean it's the best place in the world. I can talk about New York City all day. So Bishop, just tell us one thing about. I'll ask you this question: is a lot of times when people think, like I was like this too, outside of New York City, there might be a suburban white person or somebody in the South or the West that they're in a rural suburban setting, and they hear the word urban ministry and they think less than, and they think soup kitchen, they think sometimes they think black ministry, African American ministry. I want you to kind of explain, how would you explain what is urban ministry to you?
And so in my book, and so you're perfectly right, because many times we have these preconceived notions that urban ministry means black or homeless. There is such a diversity, because if you look at it, and even within the city, you have ministry need on several levels. You have high tech, you have people who are in gentrified neighborhoods. There are people who are in the upper levels in terms of their income level. And so, but they still have spiritual needs. And so the challenge with urban ministry is providing the gospel in different forms to address where people are. So in a suburban setting, there is a rhythm. There is the rhythm of the neighborhood or that community. And so church life fits in. I see New York, this is New York City, the city that never sleeps. I see where some ministries could actually be opened up at 10 o'clock on a Friday night.
Yeah.
So when some people are going to bed, others are coming out. That's when their day begins. So from my experience, urban ministry creates a fluid model of ministry, which is created to adjust to the different needs and the population.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of hit on that and to confirm what you're saying, I actually do know a pastor in Harlem that he does his youth ministry services Friday night and Saturday night at midnight. Because he said he's like, I looked at the community that I'm a part of in Harlem. My youth are not out at 5 and 6 o'clock at night. They're out at 10, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. So he says that's when we need. Exactly. I need to fish when the fish are out.
That's it.
I need to fish when the fish are out. I mean, that's the one thing. And another thing that I'd like to add to that too is, I was like this, and I know a bunch of my friends and family are kind of like this sometimes. And just the place that I grew up in, they think urban ministry is soup kitchen and food pantry, and it's serving someone less than I am. Oh. And it's not like that. I know one, and you think about Manhattan, it is the top of the top of the top when it comes to the business world.
Exactly.
There is Liberty Church NYC is one of the best churches I know that does this type of ministry. They minister to people that are high up in their career fields that think, I'm doing so well, I'm on the top of my game of my business, I don't need God. I have all the money in the world. I have the best house in the world. I'm married to a supermodel. I don't need anything. You know, I eat at the best restaurants in the world. I have a penthouse apartment that it's overlooking the best view in the world. I don't need God. And they go in and say, it doesn't matter how good you're doing, you need a savior.
We all need a savior.
So
that's why in the urban landscape, the range of ministry has to be fluid. And it doesn't mean you meet every need, but you can find your niche. That's the beauty. Find the niche that you're gifted for and function within that. And the beauty again of New York, there's always room for more. So none of us can do all that's needed in New York City. Absolutely not.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is, like, we don't need and that's another big thing that I love about doing urban ministry here is I don't believe everybody has to be a food pantry, and
No,
we
no,
don't.
no,
I don't want to go out and make 100 different soup kitchens.
no,
I want to go out and
absolutely
make
not.
100 different types of ministries. Like
Mhm.
if if you're on a block with two different churches and they both do soup kitchens, I don't want to help you set up a soup kitchen to
Another one.
compete
No,
with them.
no,
You know, let's help them be the best soup kitchen they can
perfect.
be,
That's
and
it.
then let's do an at risk youth ministry, or let's do something else, and that way we can help them do their soup kitchen and they can help us do our ministry. And I
And
think
so when we looked at even transition, we talk about the transition from the standalone ministry where you try to be everything, and then we began to do the demographic studies around us and identify what are the churches around us doing,
right,
and what are the areas which are being neglected, and then we selected those areas and then begin to major in the areas of neglect. So even with the Hope Center feeds between 75 and 1,000 and 80,000 people per year. They do the food. They give out food.
right,
They give out groceries. They do a hot meal. They do the computer training. They do the GED program. They do this English as a second language program. They do several stuff. And the idea is, let's us strengthen what others are doing, and let us look at the areas which are neglected and provide something for that.
yeah, and that's right, nail on the head there. So I think that where we're at right now is we're in an amazing opportunity where, coming out of this pandemic and coming out of the social unrest, when we finally do kind of get open and being able to do full in-person stuff, whether it be 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, the harvest is going to be so ripe for us to be there and just be like, man, we can not only just minister to one group of people, we can
That's right.
minister to every single group of people in New York City. And that's one thing that excites me so much. So Bishop, we're going to kind of head out here, but before I say this, like, this is Urban Reach NYC. You can find us on Instagram or our Facebook page, just at urbanreach.nyc. And we're going to have a website that is being built right now. It will be
That's right.
launched in the next day or two. And we want you just to follow us. We're going to be releasing different content. I'm already working on an urban ministry podcast, and we're already talking to pastors and other ministers that are going to get on here, and they're going to share their expertise. So if you want to have, you know, a good homeless ministry, we're going to bring on a person that's done homeless ministry. If you want to do, you know, at-risk youth ministry, we're going to bring some people on that does gang prevention and does, like, we're going to just think about how many different experts and different ministry fields we can represent, and we're going to bring them on here to help train you to be a better missionary and minister in your community. So just be sure to follow us on Instagram and follow us on our Facebook page at urbanreach.nyc. Bishop, do you have anything else to say?
And you can reach me at 718-385-1043, as well as my email, Bishop R.C. Nell. That's Bishop R.C. Nell, N-E-L, at COGEF.org.
Yeah, that is awesome. So yeah, we are just super excited to be here. We're so grateful that God put us together, and we're
Amen.
so grateful that He has put the vision in both of our hearts to help you to figure out, how can I better my ministry in New York City, and not just my ministry, but God's ministry.
Amen.
And that is our mission, and that's our vision. So without any further ado, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.
Stay tuned. Have a blessed day.